So let's do a little bit of a recap on what the changes to the Australian legislation are. So back in June or July, I think it was, we did a first part of this webinar with a legal expert that we deal with on a regular basis called Information Legal, and they went through more in terms of what it means from a legal standpoint and how that affects not only businesses within Australia and organisations outside of Australia dealing with Australian citizen information. So from the OAIC, the Notifiable Data Breach Scheme commences from the 22nd of February 2018. So that's just over 3 months' time. So all organisations will be required to actually meet the Australian privacy principles and put something in place that actually allows them to protect the information of individuals to safeguard them from harm. Now, if we actually look at what that actually means, well, effectively, we've actually got a lot of stuff taking place over the next sort of 6 months or thereabouts. So in February, we have the Notifiable Data Breach amendment coming into place. Then in February as well, for those people who are in the banking and finance space or retail space who are under the payment card industry data security standards, the latest version of that, version 3.2, is also becoming mandatory in February as well. So February is going to be quite a busy month for a lot of organizations, but clearly a lot of progress has been made up to this point and no doubt will continue throughout 2018 and 2019. Now, interestingly, in May in 2018, the European General Data Privacy Regulations actually come into place as well. Those actually have quite a wide-ranging implication for mainly Europe, but also for any organization that controls or processes information on European citizens outside of the EU. And I'm sure that Jean-Pierre will be able to cover off a little bit of that a little bit later on when he goes through the sort of case study that we've got. But what I wanted to do was really look at how the OAIC is actually putting quite a lot of information available to every organization in Australia to allow them to put some plans in place and to put a framework that actually gives you some guidance, not exactly being prescriptive, but guidance on how you could and should meet the new privacy regulations. So the starting point that I've actually looked at, I guess let's just rewind a little bit. So 60% of you need to read the standard, but once you've actually read the standard, and I assume that you will do that with your legal representatives, they also have a very good privacy management framework, which is available on the OAIC, and I believe that Michelle has actually provided the link to that in this Bright Talk session as well. So I would have a look at that, and that's all about embedding, establishing, evaluating, and enhancing your processes, but making them core to your data privacy strategy within your own organization. Excuse me. Now, why is all of this happening? Well, effectively, this is happening because data breaches are becoming commonplace. And we need to try and put something in place on a regional and global basis that allows us to protect information that would stop organizations putting individuals in particular harm. So if we put that into a little bit more context, there's more sensitive information in more places. So what do I mean by that? So no longer are the bounds of data being within an organization's internal systems. They're now out in the wild into handsets, tablets, cloud-based applications, external third-party outsourcers, and cloud providers. So security is driving a lot of the, how can we say, the uptake of a lot of cloud services by utilizing encryption services provided by those third parties. Now that in itself poses some unique challenges that organizations need to be mindful of when choosing which cloud service provider to use, or which data center provider or hosting provider that they choose on a global basis. And the new changing government regulations that are coming into play almost every sort of 6 months or so in different regions around the world also have impact on what we do as organizations in order to provide information securely to the people who actually need it. Now on this particular slide you can see that there's quite a lot of information that has been released in terms of records exposed, but interestingly more than 95% of all data breaches involve data that was not actually encrypted. So if we actually look at both GDPR and the privacy regulations, there are things in there called privacy by design, where an organization must start to look at when they release a new product or service, or when they are looking at their own internal systems, they're actually building privacy into the design of that new product or service or internal process from the get-go, so from the very, very beginning. Now, when we look at other areas around the world, 95% of those breaches weren't encrypted. So effectively, in the two standards, there are various different sections which actually relate to different wording around how you protect information. And within the Australian Privacy Act, it refers to de-identification of customer information. Now, you can actually read into that whatever you want, but in my mind, that is either some kind of hashing, where you would actually obfuscate that sensitive information with a different value. You could do that in many different ways, either through the use of some kind of tokenization or through the use of encryption. That would actually allow people to actually secure information throughout its life cycle. Now, these are some stats which I pulled out of the OAIC's annual report, and these are very Australia-centric because that's what we're concerned about today. But effectively, in 2016, 2017, there were a total of 149 data breach notifications around Australia across multiple sectors. But what I also wanted to pull out of this was there were, I believe, 114 of that 149 were voluntary notifications. 35 were mandatory notifications that were put upon an organization by the Information Commissioner's Office. So effectively, they are starting to flex their muscles in terms of if the breach is serious enough, they will get involved and will enforce the privacy regulations. So these are things that we need to factor into our normal day-to-day lives. Now, I was looking at the OAIC on Twitter, and they're being very, very heavy in terms of promoting the new privacy regulations, but they're being very, very clever about it because they're actually drilling down into the various different vertical segments of our market here in Australia. So on this particular screen, what you can see are a number of tweets which are regarding gyms and childcare centres, private healthcare sectors, and also the retail sector. Now, why are they kind of focusing on those kind of industries? Well, because if you think about it, those are industries which have a considerable amount of consumer information. So anything that is touching a citizen needs to be heavily controlled and heavily monitored. So you can see that they're trying to raise the awareness of what's actually happening within the standard itself. Now, the actual regulations themselves could actually be already encompassed into your own security management framework, such as ISO 27701. Not saying that ISO is a catch-all for everything, but it provides a good framework that allows you to monitor, review, and enhance processes and policies that allow you to protect customer information in the light of new regulation. So this is a very brief highlight of where some things actually occur. So on the left-hand side, we've got the actual step 1, step 2, step 3. So data types, people, processes, locations. Step 2 is visibility, risks, documentation, and appointing ownership. And step 3 is mapping those risks, mapping the security controls, and implementing those policies. Now, clearly, this is something that is going to be cyclical, so you are going to be continuously doing this. So you need to make sure you have the relevant people internally lined up to be able to match and monitor how all of this actually happens.